Good morning to you all, and welcome to this week's Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball, as usual, and as always, with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Well, my theme today is Germany and taking on more geopolitical responsibility. Just about 1 year ago, a few days after Putin invaded Ukraine, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz gave a very important speech to the Bundestag in Berlin, which he described as the Zeitenwende speech. He said that the Russian invasion of Ukraine had created a new geopolitical reality in Europe, and that therefore Germany had to take on more responsibility. Notably, at least for people in NATO, he announced that henceforth Germany would meet the NATO target to spend 2% of its GDP on defense, a long-term commitment, but Germany had not got anywhere near to doing that before February last year. And secondly, he announced a special fund of 100 billion euros to modernize the Bundeswehr. But beyond these spending targets, the overall theme was that the world had become a much more dangerous place and that Germany would have to be prepared to assume more responsibility in security and defense, and not simply, as it had done up until then, focus mainly on diplomacy or economic relations or globalization in the hope that they themselves alone would produce a more stable world. Now, this was music to the ears of the Allies, because we all know that since the end of the Second World War, Germany and Germans have been rather reticent about their army and about using force to resolve international disputes. I remember, for example, in my days at NATO, particularly in the Balkans in the 1990s, the Germans hid behind their constitution not to allow NATO AWACS aircraft, mainly manned by German crews, to fly over Bosnia. They participated later on in the Kosovo air campaign. That was good, but they didn't drop any bombs. They stuck to a reconnaissance. And in 2011, when the NATO looked to the UN Security Council to authorize its intervention in Libya to stop Colonel Gaddafi massacring his people in Benghazi, Germany actually abstained from that particular vote. Now, to be fair to the Germans, from the 1990s onwards, they did gradually take on more responsibility. For example, in Afghanistan, deploying a large number of troops in the north. They also sent 1,000 soldiers and helicopters to Mali to help the French fight jihadists. And when Germany did take casualties, both in Afghanistan and in Mali, Berlin didn't pull the plug on those missions. I recall a dinner with Volker Ruhr, former German defense minister in the 90s, when Germany for the first time sent troops beyond Germany, beyond NATO, to participate in a UN peacekeeping force in Cambodia. And Ruhr was worried that if a German soldier was killed, public opinion would turn against the mission immediately. But no, the Germans have taken casualties and stayed the course. But Scholz's speech a year ago, the Zeitenwende speech, did nonetheless sort of create the impression that Germany would now have to do much more to assume its responsibilities, both within NATO and the European Union. Now, Germany or Germans often describe these speeches as Sonntagsreden, Sunday speeches, meaning that at the weekend, politicians are happy to be visionary and to be lyrical about the future, but when depressing, boring reality sets in on a Monday, those visions are soon forgotten. So will that be the case with the Zeitenwende speech? Well, I think there are four things to look at to test how much substance there is in this new German change of heart and minds. Problem number one, or challenge number one, is to fix the Bundeswehr, the German army. It's been well known for many years that it's suffering from low morale, and old equipment, and a lack of readiness, particularly for the new, much more demanding missions that NATO has to take on. 15,000 jobs in the Bundeswehr today are not filled. A few years ago, we had a situation where 1/3 of the German Luftwaffe, the Air Force, could not fly. These were Eurofighter jets through lack of pilot training or maintenance. And Germany at one stage was not able to put any of its ships to sea, again, because of maintenance problems and issues. Germany just this week announced that it's having problems meeting its NATO commitment for the very high readiness force because of a lack of Leopard tanks. A new defense minister, Boris Pistorius, looks to be very energetic and determined to fix these problems. He's asked for an additional 10 billion euros, for example, to buy ammunition, something which is not covered, surprisingly, by this 100 billion add-on that Chancellor Scholz promised last year. But there have been several reform plans for the Bundeswehr over the last few years already, which have not come to fruition. So we have to hope that Boris Pistorius will now have the government backing to really buy new equipment for the Bundeswehr, to increase morale, to increase readiness, and also to be able to use the money that's been promised to give new contracts to German defense industry so that they can start producing again, not just for the Bundeswehr, but for NATO in general. Second test is support for Ukraine. Now, at the beginning of the conflict, a year ago, when Putin invaded, the Germans were more content to backfill their NATO partners. That means to say that if, for example, Slovakia sent an air defense system to Ukraine, Germany would then replace that system for the Slovaks. But what NATO wants, of course, is that the Germans supply their equipment directly to Ukraine itself. Now, recently, Berlin has warmed up to this idea. For example, 14 Leopard tanks are meant to leave for Ukraine soon. The Iris-T air defense system, the Gepard air defense system, the Marder infantry fighting vehicle have been transferred as well. But will the Germans now lead a consortium on tanks, which will supply the 300, not just the 14 or the 30 that the Ukrainians say that they particularly need. The fact that this week the German government gave a contract to Rheinmetall, a big German defense company, to start producing spare parts for Leopards, to upgrade the Leopards, particularly the ones that are in mothballed in Switzerland and Portugal and Spain and elsewhere, is an encouraging sign. The third issue is, will the Germans reinforce NATO? Yesterday, Boris Pistorius was in Lithuania visiting the multinational battalion that Germany leads in that country. But what NATO wants is that the Germans turn that battalion into a brigade of 5,000 troops with heavy equipment, which will ideally not be stationed back in Germany to be sent in a crisis, but permanently stationed in Lithuania. That will be more costly, but it will be more useful. And will Germany once again keep its commitment to NATO to form a armored division and take on the leading role in the conventional defense of Eastern Europe, working with Poland and Romania and the Baltic states, taking gradually the weight off the United States and acting as a framework nation to integrate the efforts of the smaller Eastern European states behind a conventional defense posture. That is a role that Germany played in the past, and we need it to play that role again. Finally, will the Germans also work with President Macron of France on his goal of European strategic autonomy? Some people may say that this is no longer necessary now that NATO seems to be the only show in town. But the French have argued, and I have some sympathy for this view, that it's also that the Ukraine war also shows the need for Europe to become more self-reliant, for example, in supply chains, in reducing its dependence on foreign energy supplies, particularly from Russia, in reopening the European supply chains for defense equipment, particularly, for example, the discussions on 155mm ammunition, which are going on at the present time. The test here is going to be that not only are the Germans able to have a good relationship with Washington, and Chancellor Scholz has been seeing Biden in Washington in recent days, but also with Paris and other European partners. For example, will the Germans and the French be able to together successfully build the sixth generation European fighter aircraft project, where Germany has seemed to be quite reluctant? The project is back on the track now. That would be one particular sign. Will they work together on the project of a European Sky Shield, an integrated air and missile defense system across Europe? Because we know from Russia's invasion of Ukraine that the Russians like to fire a lot of missiles which destroy a lot of civilian targets on the ground. So that is going to be an important requirement. And finally, will Berlin and Paris and the rest of the Europeans work to deal with the kind of security issues that are not Russia and Ukraine, like jihadism in Africa or festering conflicts on the African continent in the Middle East, which have not simply gone away because we've all been focused very much over the last year on Ukraine. So to my mind, those are the four key tests for the Zeitenwende. In other words, we need more Wende, more change, and in less Zeit in time. And I conclude by remembering a big speech, another big speech, but this time by Radek Sikorski, a former Polish foreign minister in Berlin a few years ago, when he declared that he was the first Polish foreign minister in history who wanted a stronger Germany rather than a weaker Germany. I think we can all echo those sentiments. Thank you for watching and listening today, and look forward to engaging with you next week.